Hello, I'm Aisha, and welcome to Monsoon Season Podcast. I have my little baby Ganesh that I always have with me as my little totem. Today I wanted to keep things very casual, heart to heart, and light. And I wanted to share a little bit more behind the scenes and the making of this podcast and share 7 unconventional reasons that I started this podcast in the first place. And a lot of them are going to be things that would surprise you. Okay, so the first unconventional reason I started this podcast was because I was clinically depressed and I was at my breaking point. So almost 3 years ago from August, which is wild, I was just in a very, very different headspace mentally. I was at my lowest low. I was having lots of panic attacks at work and off hours as well. And my body was just going through so many crazy changes hormonally and through like autoimmune issues and disorders I was dealing with. I just felt so not at home in my body, in my mind, or in my heart. And I was in such a dark place. There were so many terrible thoughts that I just couldn't shake. And I got to a place where I was like, you know what? It would just be easier if I weren't here anymore. And so I had a lot of those types of thoughts that started to creep in. And I was just exhausted from holding it all together, always making it look easy to carry the load I was carrying. And even when I would talk to people about, try to tell people that what I was feeling and how heavy it was, people were like, you look fine. You look so you seem like you're doing okay. You're doing a lot better than you think. And I think the people who carry it really, really well have the hardest time getting help, because if you can carry the heaviness and the weight of depression and anxiety really well, it kind of does you a huge disservice. A lot of people don't really take it seriously as much. And I just really struggled to tell people how bad it really was. And at my lowest point, I went back to a meditation practice. And during one of my meditations, a voice inside of my heart, maybe it was a divine message from God, from source, from universe, I got this message that I should start a podcast. And I remember finishing that meditation and immediately going on Amazon and buying this exact mic that I have, this Shure mic on Amazon. And it came in the mail and I just started speaking into a microphone and sharing the things I was going through. The first episode I ever uploaded 3 years ago was an episode about chronic fatigue and dealing with depression. And the other thing was I didn't tell a single person that I had a podcast. I just started posting them on YouTube and on Spotify and Apple. I, YouTubed how to upload podcasts. I spent weeks trying to figure out the technical stuff, which was a huge pain in the ass in itself. But yeah, that was the reason I started, is because I was depressed. And once I started just speaking my truth into the world and sharing my story and using my words and self-expressing, the knots in my heart started to untangle. And there wasn't a moment where everything just magically got better or easier, but doing the podcast, the practice and the reps of the podcast was a huge, huge part of my healing journey. The second unconventional reason is I wanted to find my voice. When I was a kid, I would just always constantly get bullied that I did not have a good voice. And probably it wasn't as bad as I think it was, but I remember hearing that and attaching myself to those thoughts and those opinions very, very heavily as a kid, is just always remembering people making fun of my voice. If I sang, they were like, oh my God, you're terrible at singing. You don't have a good singing voice. And it always stayed with me. For whatever reason, my psyche, my consciousness attached to that so heavily. And so it became this belief, this external opinion that ended up turning into this internal belief that grew stronger and stronger and stronger over time. And I just had this weird relationship with my voice where I didn't like the sound of my voice. And I know all of us have been in those moments in life where we like listen to a voicemail of ourselves. And this is like, back when we had like our messaging answering machines and stuff. But like I would hear my voice and I'd be like, oh God, like, is that how I sound? And then I just kept reinforcing the story that I have a bad voice. I don't have a good voice. I don't have a good voice. And I associated not being able to sing and not having a good singing voice as like a blatant statement across the board that like my whole voice sucked. And funnily enough, like in high school, anytime like the teacher called on me to like read something, I really enjoyed it. And I didn't understand why whenever I was called on, I would love to like stand up in front of class and recite a monologue or read out loud in front of people. It was just something I always loved. But then I felt weird. I was like, wait, no, but I have a bad voice. I shouldn't be reading stuff in front of people. And I ended up studying theater and acting in college. So the irony is like acting and being on stage really allowed me to like change my relationship with my voice and realize that my voice is a tool that I can use to change and to step into a character and tell a story. But when you're doing theater, you're playing a different character. You're not playing yourself. So with podcasting, it was such an interesting journey for me because, and it still is to like find my own voice has been a huge path. And even 3 years later, I'm still not sure I've found it yet. I feel like every episode I create, I get closer and closer to it. And it's like that very famous Miles Davis quote where he says, like, it takes a long time to sound like yourself. And it's so true. Like, I still feel like every time I upload, I'm still getting like a millimeter closer to that true heart voice. But it's such a huge part of what I love about podcasting and what I wanted to get, a goal I wanted to get out of podcasting, because not only are you amplifying your voice and broadcasting your voice via this mic and then like distributing it across the world and the globe, you are also forced to kind of have a different relationship with your voice because when you're podcasting and you don't have a team of editors, I mean, I do everything from start to finish on my own. And when I'm like watching playback and editing a video, I have to sit there and hear myself over and over and over again. And I remember the first few episodes being like in such excruciating pain editing my own voice and editing video of myself. But the more I sat there and loved on myself and thought positive things or even just neutral things, my relationship to my voice changed. And I also now do a bunch of vocal exercises, and I even do kirtan singing, which is like devotional singing before I record episodes just to like help really unlock that throat chakra, which is kind of wild. But yeah, I've gained like this huge love of my voice and realizing that this is a gift that was naturally given to me to use my voice to amplify goodness in the world. And so that's what I discovered as I've been podcasting. The third reason I started a podcast is that I was tired of seeing the same 10 to 12 people being celebrated and interviewed on other podcasts. It became, for me, like what has been so interesting. This is a really big one. I feel like it's the same kind of voices at the top. And these people are masters, they're great, and I've been doing this for far longer than I have, but it's just the same voices that I see. I always saw male podcasters who were literally interviewing the same people and rotating. You'd see a few weeks later that podcast guest on another top male, whatever, wellness podcast or self-development podcast. And the podcast world, I always felt like was very divided, where the male podcasters are kind of like at the very top in terms of having like the widest audience of like more inclusive people. And then there are female um founded podcasts that have very specifically niche targeted audiences. So like a lot of women of color or women podcasters only really cater to other women of color. And that's incredible. We need that. But I saw myself as someone who can really speak to a global audience and not just to women and women of color, even though that is who, my heart is speaking to. I just had this like I don't know if it was this like audacious or pompous, whatever idea in my head that like I want to be at the top. And I also want to like bring guests on that are not just celebrities or not just people that everyone else has on their podcast, and really using my platform to bring new voices and up and coming and emerging voices into the forefront. That's been a huge goal of mine. Yeah, I'm just tired. I think being tired of how the system or the culture is around an industry is such an important thing to be aware of when you're stepping into something. I see a huge gap at the very, very top. I don't see a woman that looks like me at the top of the podcasting world. And if you can see that for yourself, then why not? Like, why not go for it? And why not just reach for the stars? So the fourth reason is I know deep down that my dharma in life is not to spotlight and elevate myself. I say this off the tail end of admitting that I want to be at the very top of the podcasting food chain. But the truth of the matter is that my dharma is to be a vessel for other people to really shine and to spotlight people who are doing incredible work in serving their communities and humanity. And that's a huge reason why I do what I do. It's not about me. When I first started podcasting, it was very much to serve this survival instinct inside of me, because I felt like I was going to die if I didn't share my story, if I didn't have a place to creatively let this part of myself out and let all these stories and messages and things that I had in my heart. If I wasn't able to unleash this to the world, I knew I would die. Like, I just felt it so viscerally and in every single cellular part of me, I felt this was so needed. So once I started kind of getting into the momentum of things, so my first 2 years, I was just building the podcast to survive, like mentally, and share my story. The third year, this year, has been the first year where I've actually promoted. I don't even know if I've technically really promoted the podcast. I think I could do a way better job of that, but what this year has been about is turning the compass from me to like the outside, and to like turn the focus and spotlight to the people that I bring on and to the audience, and to think about the audience when I'm speaking, and thinking about like, how can I give as much value as possible? How can I be as present as possible? How can I channel the right message, the right the right insights, the right questions, the right conversations, so the person listening on the other end can feel something, can be sparked by something that is said and shared in that moment. And yeah, that's been a huge shift and something that I didn't start with, but once I was able to kind of get myself out of like the darkest part of my depression and the survival mode of my depression. And once I was able to like find that footing with my voice, that's when I was able to tap into that bigger purpose and a bigger story behind why I do what I do. So yeah, I do the podcast so that I can spotlight the people that I find interesting and that are doing really great work. So number 5 is it checks so many of my boxes of my creative skills. It checks the box of researching, telling stories, facilitating vulnerable conversations. There's a level of theatrics and performance and crafting questions and crafting the arc of a story. All of these things are things that I grew up with. Like, I studied theater in college. I studied playwriting and acting and directing, and playwriting and putting on plays is very similar to doing a podcast in so many ways. And once I graduated from college and I got hit with that like real world, like gotta get a real job and stable job. And when I entered into corporate and startup world, I lost so many of my connection to those skills, those creative skills that I had acquired over my teens and my college years, that the craft of creating stories and telling stories, all of that stuff like is who I am. And when I was doing corporate work for 15 years, a lot of those craft, like a lot of those skills and those the things that I really found as the most important parts of my craft, those like muscles atrophied in a lot of ways. So podcasting was and is such a beautiful way for me to be able to tap into that creative self that has always been there and the artist heart. And that's what I love so much about podcasting. A lot of people would be shocked by this, but me researching a guest is like so my freaking jam. It's not like work for me. I can spend hours and days just diving deep into someone's story and going down rabbit holes and like pulling questions. And I don't use AI for any of that stuff. Like, I go purely off intuition. And so it's been really cool to, once I started opening up the podcast to have guests again, because most of the episodes I've done are solo episodes, but when I get to have a guest on, it is so it's so invigorating. It lights up so many different parts of the collaborative, the collective energy that is required when putting a theater like ensemble together. It like hits on so many of those skills that I, in my creative height that I like leveraged, and now I get to like leverage them in the podcast. And it's a medium that just really speaks to me and allows me to flex a lot of different creative skill sets in different ways. So I absolutely love that so much. The 6th reason is it allows me to practice and embody vulnerability. So vulnerability is the very essence and heartbeat of everything I do. And for a very long time, I really panicked and struggled with like how to package that, how to tell the world that this vulnerability piece is the most important piece of the podcast. And then just quite recently, maybe in the last 6 or 8 months or so, I've realized that vulnerability is actually not something I can tell. It's something I have to show. I can tell it, but like it's more powerful when it's shown. And so I decided, and I've always been embodying vulnerability, but like it's just been more intentional recently to know that that's enough, that embodying vulnerability, like people feel it. People feel when you have your guard down, and they feel when you're speaking from your heart, when you're speaking from a place of truth and a place of reverence. There's a sincerity to vulnerability that is so potent and special and can't be replicated by a performance of any kind. And it's really like the bread and butter of what I do. I think that is the thing that comes in a weird way naturally, but it's also just like I've practiced vulnerability on a day-to-day, moment-to-moment level, that bringing that into the podcast is something so sacred and so real to me. And there have been parts when I started promoting the podcast where I started seeing myself shy away from being as vulnerable, because I was scared that if I was too vulnerable, that I wouldn't be taken seriously. I would kind of lose my sense of authority, or lose that kind of um saving face, or like that leadership strength that I wanted to exude. But what I found is that this world needs vulnerability so, so bad. It needs it so bad. And that my seat of authority is fully embodying vulnerability as much as possible. And the more vulnerable I am, the more my guest can open up their heart and share their stories from a very, very different frequency and from a very different vibration. And I felt it very, very much so when that happens. It's just a magical thing. And I also know that every time I'm vulnerable, that's when there's more resonance in the message that I'm sharing. And those are the videos or the episodes that tend to get these like comments or reflections from listeners that feel so real. And I love seeing that so much. Like, I love my community so much. Like, when you guys leave a comment, like, it literally lights me up. It makes me feel so, so excited, because I just notice like the people that are commenting are just not being like, hey, that was good. Like, they're always opening up and sharing things about themselves and giving so much more depth and so much more realness. And that, to me, like having fewer comments, but comments of substance and engagement that really generates this open space of safety, is so much more important to me than volume of comments or views or things like that, of that nature. But yes, allowing myself to practice and embody vulnerability is such a gift to me through this podcast. And number 7 is, I started this podcast because I wanted to fall in love with myself. Ironically, the last reason was the vulnerability thing, but this is the thing that kind of is the hardest to say out loud. I feel vulnerable saying that, but I made this podcast so that I could create a container to fall in love with myself. When you go through depression, there is a saying that, I've shared a few times in the past, but I'll just share it really briefly, where I heard Mike Posner on Know Thyself podcast once, where he described depression as love going rancid. And the love goes rancid because there's nowhere for it to go inside of you, and you're suppressing all this love and this creative energy. And that's exactly how I felt. I remember hearing him say that and it resonating so deeply with me. It still stays with me to this day. And I heard it years ago. And when you're depressed, you not only are you feeling like this heaviness and this lethargy and this like kind of isolation, antisocialness, you're feeling this love, this pure light slowly like rot and go rancid and somehow turn on you and turn into self-animosity and self-hatred. And the voices in my head, my inner saboteur, and we all have those, right? We all have those. It's a humanistic quality and part of our human nature. But those voices were so loud and so vicious and so harsh to me. Like, there was so much hate that I had in my heart, so much hardness that I had inside of myself for myself. And doing this podcast has been this like incredible journey that I truly think is just starting. But it's been this beautiful journey of being able to like look at myself from a different vantage point and truly be able to see myself and see like the gifts that I have and celebrate myself even when I fumble and I mess up. And I know not every episode has been a hit. I know that for a fact, but still being like, damn girl, you tried, you were consistent, you showed up, like good for you. Like, you're doing it. And your past self would never have had the audacity or the gumption or the guts to do it. And you're doing it. Like, the self-talk has completely shifted and changed and turned into like love, turned it back into love. So like my love went rancid during my depression, turned on me, and the podcast has allowed it to transform back into this thing that's even more pure, more true, more vibrant, more light. And for that, I am so grateful. And it's a reason that I wasn't aware of until I started making a list of the reasons why I started a podcast. And so this is the newest reason, I would say, is that we create art. We create art so we can find ourselves. We create things in the world so we can come back, that we can return to a place of truth and a place of unconditional love that cannot be taken from us. And that's what making this podcast has given me. And there's no way I can stop now. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and I will catch you on the next one. You are so loved, and I'll see you soon.